Vincent could hardly sit still on the plane, his excitement bubbling over. He was finally traveling overseas, to America of all places. The thrill of the journey had only truly settled in after he recovered from the strange unease he felt during takeoff. Before the plane left the ground, he had been perfectly fine, but the moment it ascended, an unfamiliar sensation overtook him. A sudden dizziness, as if the plane's entire weight was pressing down on him, made him whisper a quick prayer. What have I gotten myself into? Desperate to steady himself, he looked out the window, but instantly regretted it. The sight of the ground disappearing beneath him sent a jolt through his spine. In a panic, he shut his eyes, then quickly pulled the window shade down, as if blocking the view would also silence his fear. Keep looking straight ahead, Vincent. Steady, man, steady, he told himself. Moments later, the turbulence eased, and the plane leveled out. A wave of relief washed over him, followed by sheer joy. This wasn't just any trip, it was the fulfillment of a long-awaited dream. In less than 24 hours, he would finally see his brother, Victor, the one who had made this journey possible. The thought sent shivers of anticipation down his spine. For years his family had prayed for this moment, and now it was real. Vincent had dressed the part too, formally, like a man going to an interview. He wasn't about to let anyone look down on him or assume he wasn't prepared. He had heard stories about America's freezing temperatures and wasn't taking any chances. Even though he had never been on a plane or traveled outside his home country, he had dressed for winter, bracing himself for what he imagined would be an icy welcome. Yet, despite the excitement, a nagging worry crept into his thoughts. Would Victor really be there waiting for him at the airport? After all, it had been over 20 years since anyone in the family had last seen him. As a child, Vincent had idolized his older brother, but that was a lifetime ago. Why had Victor never returned home? Why had his letters become so infrequent over the years? He had heard stories of people who left for the West and never looked back, abandoning their roots. Had Victor become one of them? The thought nearly dampened his excitement, but exhaustion soon pulled him into sleep. Hours later, an announcement woke him. They had arrived. His heart pounded. This was it. In just an hour after clearing immigration, he would see Victor, and then there he was. Vincent's breath caught in his throat as his eyes landed on a familiar yet unfamiliar face in the crowd. Victor! He cried out, his voice cracking with emotion. He took a step forward, then another. Victor! My brother! Victor stood still, his expression unreadable, as if he had been startled awake. Slowly he moved forward, his arms hesitantly opening as they closed the gap between them. For a moment they simply stood there, searching each other's faces, making sure they weren't dreaming. And then, in an instant, they embraced. A long, desperate embrace. Neither spoke, only sobs filled the air. Victor trembled in his arms. It's okay, brother, Vincent whispered, trying to steady his own emotions. Thank God I found you. But something wasn't right. As they finally pulled away, Vincent studied his brother's face. Victor had changed. His skin was lighter, polished even, but his eyes carried a weight Vincent couldn't ignore. Brother, you've changed, Vincent said with a small laugh, trying to shake off his unease. Victor forced a smile. Of course, Vin. It's been ages, baby brother. Yes, but are you okay? Vincent pressed, his eyes narrowing. Victor's smile faltered. I'm fine, he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Vincent didn't believe him. He wanted to, but something in Victor's expression told a different story, a story of struggle, of something unspoken. But for now, Vincent chose to let it go. He was finally with his brother, and that was what mattered. Trying to lighten the mood, Vincent chuckled. I can't wait to call home and tell them their son has turned into Oyibo himself. He reached for Victor's arm, lifting it toward his own for comparison. Look at your skin and look at mine. Victor finally let out a real laugh, and with that they stepped into the waiting taxi, heading home together. It was already late when they finally reached home. Overwhelmed with joy, Victor could hardly contain himself. After what felt like a decade apart, his brother, his blood, had finally returned. He wanted to know everything, but time had slipped away unnoticed. Only when his stomach rumbled did he realize how late it was. Glancing up at the clock, he froze. It was already 2 a.m. He turned to his brother, guilt washing over him. Vincent, I'm so sorry. I was so caught up in excitement, I forgot you've had a long journey, and now it's too late for a proper meal, he said regretfully. Why don't we find something to eat? Tomorrow I'll wake up early and cook something nice for you. And Victor kept his promise. Before Vincent even stirred, Victor was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The rich aroma filled the house as Vincent walked in, taking a seat across from his brother at the dining table. And it was Victor who opened the conversation as soon as he saw that his brother was seated. A lot has happened since I left home, he said softly, a peculiar kind of smile tugging at his lips. But it wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It carried the weight of sorrow. Carefully, he lowered a cup of coffee onto the table, his hand steady enough to prevent a spill, yet not enough to hide his turmoil. I've noticed, Vincent answered, his expression shifting. It wasn't anger that darkened his face, but something deeper: grief, disappointment, fear, and regret. They were blood. They felt each other's pain. Sitting quietly at the breakfast table, Vincent felt grief eating through him. He watched his brother, his movements uneasy, hands trembling slightly, going back and forth in circles, lost in the simple task of preparing breakfast. Vincent clenched his fist beneath the table. He couldn't hold back any longer. He needed to know. Now, tell me, how did it happen? He asked, his voice calm, yet heavy with urgency. Victor hesitated, ignoring his brother's gaze. Go on, drink your coffee, he muttered. Vincent's expression darkened. His fingers curled into fists. Coffee! He scoffed. His voice was low, but his anger was rising. Oh, look how you make it sound so pleasant. Coffee! He suddenly spat on the floor in disgust. No, brother, I see more than coffee in that cup. I see blood. His voice cracked as he slammed his fist onto the table. God forbid that I should drink my own brother's blood. With that, he grabbed the cup, rushed to the sink, and emptied it. The dark liquid swirled down the drain. Victor sat motionless, his head bowed. Vincent wasn't done. His fear had turned into rage. His grief was boiling over. I need answers, Victor, he shouted. Since I arrived, I've watched you move like a ghost in your own home. I was afraid on the plane, but now I know my fears were real. What happened to you? Who did this to you? Tears streamed down his face. He had held it in for too long, but now his pain was too much to bear. Victor finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Vincent, do you love me? Yes, brother, Vincent choked out. Then stop crying and look at me, Victor pleaded. It's not as bad as you think. Vincent stiffened. He could barely breathe. So I was right, he whispered. His heart pounded in his chest. His worst nightmare was unfolding before his eyes. Victor forced a smile. I've been ill lately, but I'm getting better. Look at me. I'm still here, aren't I? Please don't make me feel sorry for myself. It's okay, Victor urged, as Vincent finally managed to control his emotions. He couldn't speak. His head was in turmoil. Confusion clouded his thoughts. He only wanted to weep, to let it all out. But another part of him held back, knowing that breaking down in front of a sick man would only make things worse. If he was truly ready to help his brother, he told himself, he had to be strong. He had to be a man. Vincent, Victor called out, his voice calm yet piercing, his gaze deep and searching. Do you love me? Vincent swallowed hard. Yes, brother. he managed to say, his voice breaking. Then stop crying and look at me, Victor pleaded, his tone soft but firm. It's not as bad as you think. Vincent stiffened. His heart pounded in his chest. So I was right, he whispered, his worst fears creeping into reality. Victor forced a smile, but it was hollow. I've been ill lately, but I'm getting better. Look at me. I'm still here, aren't I? Vincent clenched his jaw, his hands trembling under the table. Vincent, Victor called softly, his voice steady yet heavy with unspoken emotions. He stared deeply into his younger brother's face, waiting until he saw that Vincent was ready to listen. Since you're too hot to eat, why don't you come with me? He suggested, slowly rising from the dining table. Let me show you around. Vincent hesitated, his brows furrowed, but Victor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Cheer up, Endua Nem, he said, forcing a smile. Don't let sorrow make you see only the bad side of things. I am blessed. Your brother is rich. He chuckled lightly, trying to ease the tension. The first son of Atlanta village to travel overseas, to leave his life behind and build a new one in Obodo Oyibo. It will always be a credit to our family from generation to generation, he added, still smiling, trying desperately to put Vincent at ease. But what started as a simple tour of his home soon took an unexpected turn. Victor, lost in thought, unknowingly led his brother outside towards a ladder propped against the house. Vincent, trusting him, followed without question. They climbed higher and higher, neither realizing where they were headed. And then, look out, Victor! Vincent's panicked voice shattered the silence as he stretched his foot forward, nearly stepping off the edge of the roof. In an instant, Victor lunged forward, grabbing his brother by the collar just in time. His heart pounded wildly in his chest. One more step, he breathed, his grip tightening, and you would have fallen to your death. Vincent gasped, his eyes darting around in confusion. His voice came out hoarse. Where are we? He swallowed hard, feeling a rush of shame and panic. Chineke ekwela ihe ojo. The words tumbled out in their native tongue. Victor blinked, his own mind suddenly snapping back to reality. He turned his head, taking in their surroundings. We're not in the bedroom, he murmured, disoriented. Vincent let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. No, Victor, we're on the roof. A heavy silence fell between them before Vincent grabbed his brother's arm. Let's get down first, he said, his voice firm. One step at a time. When we're safely on the ground, then we'll talk. With slow, careful movements, they descended the ladder. But as soon as their feet touched the ground, Vincent turned to face his brother, his face twisted in raw emotion. You lied to me, he accused. Victor's brows furrowed in confusion. You told me I was wrong, that I was blinded by sorrow. Vincent continued, his voice rising. But I see clearly now. You're sick. You're losing control. You almost led us both to death. His words cut through the air like a blade. Victor opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Vincent let out a bitter chuckle. Doesn't it sound funny? He sneered. He took a shaky step back, his laughter turning into something unhinged, something broken. You wanted to take me around and show me your wealth. He let out another sharp laugh. Instead, you led me to my death. How does that sound, brother? Tell me. Tears welled in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Victor could only stand there, stunned into silence. Vincent's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't think. I need a drink, he muttered to himself, suddenly storming towards the refrigerator. Victor took a step forward. I can get it for you. No! Vincent snapped. His voice was sharp, final. He yanked open the fridge, his breath uneven. From now on, I'll do everything myself. Who knows where you'll lead me next? He grabbed a bottle and took a long burning sip. But the alcohol did nothing to dull his emotions. Instead, his frustration bubbled over. He slammed the bottle down on the table and exhaled sharply. That's why I've always hated life, he spat. Look at you, brother, out of your mind. What did you do to deserve this? Victor's lips parted, but Vincent wasn't done. It was a decision I made more than 25 years ago, Victor began, his voice steady yet distant. I was just a boy at the time, but not for one day have I regretted it. In fact, it was the best decision I ever made. He exhaled deeply, his gaze drifting into the past. If I die today, I have nothing to lose. I've tasted life. I've had everything I ever dreamed of. Things people labor for, things money can buy. And most of all, I've had my family's undying love. So tell me, what more do I need? Vincent clenched his jaw, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. But Victor continued. I know there are men my age still struggling to find who they are, but I never had that challenge. Everything was handed to me on a platter of gold. Some may not understand, but I count myself a blessed man. No matter how you look at it, my journey in this life has been a good one. His lips curled into a small, tired smile. I have peace within me. Vincent shook his head, his fingers tightening into fists. Victor, don't cry. Victor cut in, his voice suddenly soft. Please be strong for me. Vincent's breath hitched. Seeing you like this, almost driving yourself crazy over me, is the most pitiful sight I've ever seen. But it shows me something. It shows me how much you all care. The distance couldn't separate us, years apart, yet the love remains stronger. It only proves that the bond tying us together is unbreakable. Victor leaned back, his eyes filled with something unreadable. So, what more can I say? He sighed. One day we will leave this world, but if not for the burdens of this life, I would proudly say I am satisfied. I care no more. His voice dropped to a whisper. I have achieved what I came here to do. I saved your lives. A silence stretched between them. Vincent swallowed hard, his throat tight. Victor finally looked up, his expression unreadable. The rest doesn't matter anymore. He paused, his mind clouded with memories. You know, I never truly felt at home, even as a child. Deep inside, I always knew my life belonged somewhere else, a place far away, a place I didn't understand, but I kept seeing myself on a journey that never seemed to end. He chuckled bitterly. And if that's what it'll take, then so be it. Vincent's stomach twisted. He could sense it, the weight of something unsaid. Who are you talking about, brother? He demanded, cutting through the heavy silence. Victor met his eyes, his expression finally breaking. My father. Vincent frowned. What father? Dr. Cohen, Victor murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He's my father. Vincent's head snapped back in shock. Dr. Cohen, the man who adopted you? Victor nodded slowly. He loved me, Vincent. He would do anything for me. How could I say no to his one and only request? His voice faltered slightly, but he kept going. I couldn't say no. Vincent sat frozen. His heartbeat roared in his ears. What request? He finally forced out, dreading the answer. Victor hesitated, his face darkening. The real reason I was taken in, the true purpose of my coming here, the reason they went through the pain of adopting me. Vincent's pulse pounded. His hands gripped the edge of the table. Victor, talk to me, he pleaded. What was the request? Victor's lips parted, but no words came. Then Vincent's entire body went cold. His mind started connecting the dots. His voice trembled. Wait, no, no, don't tell me. You think I'm insane, don't you? Victor finally spoke, his voice eerily calm. Vincent jumped from his seat, his breath ragged. Insane! Victor, Tell me you didn't. That's what you'll say, Victor interrupted, his gaze unwavering. Vincent's blood ran cold. You mean you signed your own death warrant? He shouted, his voice breaking. You fool! Victor's face remained unreadable. I'm your elder brother, Vincent. Mind how you talk to me. Right now, I don't care, Vincent spat. It doesn't matter. Victor sighed, shaking his head. You wouldn't understand. Vincent slammed his fist on the table. Then help me understand. Victor finally looked him in the eye. You don't know what it means to be the first son. If you were in my shoes, you'd do the same. Vincent flinched. You see, Victor continued, after Papa and Mama, the first son carries the burden. What do you expect me to do? Watch them struggle to feed five hungry mouths when they barely had enough for themselves? Watch Papa come home empty handed, forcing Mama to make something out of nothing? Vincent's chest tightened. What do you expect me to do when I watch my loving mother grow thinner, older, wearing rags, going to sleep hungry? Victor's voice cracked. I will never forget the day I followed her to the market, he whispered. She walked from one fish stand to another, searching for the cheapest fish, and still couldn't afford it. He shut his eyes as if trying to block out the memory. I was sad, almost angry, watching my mother struggle to afford even the smallest fish in the market. To this day, I haven't forgiven myself for feeling that way towards her. At one point, I couldn't bear it anymore. I urged her to leave everything and just go home. Let's go, Mama, I said, almost yelling, my voice thick with frustration. I feared someone I knew might see us, might witness our shame. Do you know how many times I've given up my own portion of food just so the twins could have enough? With a well packaged lie on my lips, I would assure them I wasn't hungry. And Ada and her diabetes. What do you have to say about that? Watching her lose her sight, then her leg, my beautiful sister, withering away before our very eyes. And yet nothing could be done. We fed her kind words, prayers, false hope. It's going to be okay, Ada. But we knew the truth. What she needed was proper medical care, nutritious food, things we simply couldn't afford. She was one of the reasons I said yes, but even then, I couldn't save her life. Victor groaned, his voice breaking as he continued. So tell me, Vincent, what would you have done in my place when the only thing standing between you and money, money that could change all our lives, was a single word? His eyes locked onto his brother's, his hands trembling. Yes, that's all I had to say, and the money started flowing. Vincent's eyes widened in horror as Victor's voice dropped to a whisper. Yes, I agreed to be used for a scientific experiment. Shimo! Vincent screamed, his body jerking forward as if he had been struck. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. Jesus Christ, Victor! Yes, Victor repeated, his voice eerily calm. That's what it is. In order to save your lives, I said yes, and my life was never the same again. The first time Dr. Cohen brought it up, I thought it was a joke. Even when he explained, even when he assured me over and over that it was nothing dangerous, I still didn't fully understand. That night, I had gone to his study to announce my retirement for the evening. It was a small tradition between us. I would stop by, talk for a few minutes before heading to bed. He had grown so attached to me, couldn't bear letting me out of his sight. They never had children of their own, so I was all he had. I won't lie, he loved me, so much so that at times it scared me. It felt like obsession. But I loved him too. I could never repay him for all he had done for me. So that night, as I turned to leave, I heard him call, Son. I turned back. You called me, Dad? Yes, son, he said, smiling. Don't go just yet. I have something to discuss with you. All right, old man, I teased, chuckling as I walked toward him. What is it this time? Sit down, young man. His smile remained, but something about it felt different. That was the night he told me the truth. Victor, I am an extraordinary man with extraordinary interests, he said, standing up and pacing slowly. His eyes darkened. It may sound strange to you, but it's true. I have dedicated my life to studying the human brain. I swallowed. A strange chill crept up my spine, and when I saw with my own eyes what you could do, your brilliance, your mind, I knew. Knew what? I asked, barely breathing. That you qualify. The room tilted. Qualify for what? My voice was barely a whisper. Victor, have you ever heard of people being used for medical research? My breath hitched. Jesus Christ! I gasped, leaping from my chair. My heart pounded as nausea twisted my stomach. No, 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 son. He rushed forward, grabbing my hands. It's not what you think. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that will harm you. His voice was gentle, pleading. His grip was strong, unwavering. Oh, my son, how could I ever hurt you? The only thing keeping me alive in this world. Victor exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face as he recalled that moment. He begged me, Vincent, told me it would help me, that it would help us all. For a long time I resisted, but he was relentless. Each time I backed away, he pulled me right back in until one day I stopped fighting. Until one day I said yes. Vincent's entire body shook. His lips parted, but no words came out. He wanted to scream. He wanted to curse. He wanted to grab his brother and shake him, force him to take it all back. Instead, he slumped in his seat, gripping his head. Hey, 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 Victor, he groaned. Curse be on that man, he spat, his hands balling into fists. Then suddenly his head snapped up. Where is he? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Where is the devil himself? I swear I will snap his life out in a second. Victor shook his head. He's dead. Vincent froze. Dead? Yes. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Vincent exhaled, looking up toward the ceiling. Blessed be the soul of the departed. His voice was tight, bitter. The story is just getting started. Stay tuned for part 2 and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The end. For now.